Thank you, Secretary Albright. Very glad to have you with us on I-24 News for our TV viewers. I think it's great to have you at this time when the world is in big trouble. Mrs. Secretary, you are one of the most respected U.S. diplomats inside the Congress in Washington, D.C., the Democratic Party, and abroad. You know President Biden very well. Can you tell us how you think he will put a split America back on track after 4 years of crazy Trumpism?
Christian, it's very good to be with you, and I am looking forward to our interview. Let me just say, I know President Biden very well. I have known him since he was a senator, and somebody who cares deeply about the American system of government and has an understanding of foreign policy that I think is unmatched by any former president, frankly. And so he also is very clear about the fact that he's talked about it, that we're not red states and blue states, we're the United States of America. And he is working very hard already in terms of trying to mend the problems. Last night, he had a town hall meeting in Wisconsin. I was listening to it, and he made many, many points about working together and about understanding what the other side thinks and operating in a way of respect, of learning about each other. There's no question that there are huge divisions in the United States created by the last president, who built on some economic issues to exacerbate those divisions. But I can tell you from knowing President Biden, it will continue to be one of his major goals that he talked about in his inaugural speech about bringing Americans back together and being a very good example of democracy being able to correct itself.
President Biden said he wants the world order issued from 1945 with United States dominance to be back. But don't you think it will be impossible when you know the West has to face a Chinese, Russian, Iranian, North Korean axis, which is very hostile to the West?
I don't think he put it quite the way you said, but what he wants to see is a strong America working with our partners to deal with the problems of the 21st century and work with institutions that did evolve right after World War II, but also need to be refurbished and reestablished in some ways. I think he doesn't see American dominance. He sees America's partnerships. And the issues that you have pointed out definitely require an American presence, an understanding of working with our partners and trying to really deal with the issues as they have been outlined. Obviously, China is a major issue in terms of its adversarial competitive position, but also the necessity to cooperate. And so he knows the issues that are out there. As I've said, he really is more familiar with them than most people coming in as president. And I think that he's determined to work with our friends and our allies to be able to solve those problems, and then also develop relationships with those whom are adversaries to see how we can solve those problems and find areas where we can work together. So, for instance, with the Chinese, that we need to cooperate in terms of dealing with climate change, which is why he has said America is re-entering the Paris Agreement.
Alexei Pushkov, a Russian senator, former chairman of the Commission on Foreign Affairs at the Russian Senate, who was my guest recently, told us, and I quote him, "The danger of Cold War exists if Joe Biden forgets the United States have not the power to bring down Russia." Is there for you, Secretary Albright, a risk we get back to the Cold War?
I think there's always a risk, but this is not what I think that President Biden sees. I think that, there is not the idea of bringing down Russia. I think part of the problem is that Russia is constantly trying to interfere in not only American affairs, but also in trying to separate our friends and allies in Europe from us. And so the U.S. is not the aggressor. The Russians are using a variety of tactics to undermine democracy. And it is a way, frankly, for Putin, who is in trouble economically, to wave the flag of nationalism and hysteria in order to maintain his power. I also do think that one has to look at, clearly our relationship with the Russians is complicated, given what I've just been talking about. But at the same time, the Biden administration has decided that we are going to extend the New START treaty and that we need to talk about some of the issues to do with arms control. And again, the Russians also have to be involved in issues to do with climate change. But they are the ones that are pushing their activities into, for instance, up into the Arctic or pushing in the Baltic Sea. And so they are the ones that are trying to undermine the system. But I think everybody will try very hard not to have a new Cold War.
You just alluded, Mr. Secretary, you just alluded to the START treaty. Can the recent prolongation of this treaty on the reduction of American and Russian nuclear arsenals be of good omen? In other words, can it help the two superpowers to find common ground in the future?
I hope that it can. And by the way, as you know, last week or 10 days ago now, former Secretary of State George Shultz died. And in memory of him, through many obituaries and various comments, there were discussions about how he, with President Reagan, even at a very difficult time, was able to figure out ways for us to be able to work with the Russians. I don't think that any period needs to be compared to another, but I do think that working on the New START treaty is a step forward and important. There are other agreements to do with arms control that need to be looked at in terms of, because the New START treaty doesn't deal with all the different weapon systems, but I think it is an important, literally, start, and that it's an important sign that there has been a decision to extend the time.
Mrs. Secretary, we have a break now, and we will be back in about 3 minutes.
Esta semana en News 24, fútbol que derriba barreras. Estudiantes de La Plata, Tel Aviv, israelíes, refugiados y nuevos inmigrantes juegan en el mismo equipo. ¿Es un ave? ¿Es un avión? ¿Un restaurante? El Air Force One de Israel aterrizó en el corazón de la Autoridad Nacional Palestina. SafeUp, una aplicación que busca mejorar la sensación de seguridad de las mujeres, protegiéndose una a la otra. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de i24 News.
are back with our guest tonight, Secretary Madeleine Albright, who was under the presidency of US President Bill Clinton. Mrs. Albright, Mrs. Secretary, Vladimir Putin definitely took advantage of a Donald Trump who was too weak, too gullible. Do you think the firmness that President Biden wants to show vis-à-vis Vladimir Putin will pay off?
I certainly hope so, because it's very important. And President Biden doesn't want to be flattered by Putin and then let Putin get away with the kinds of things that he did by saying that none of the things that we knew were happening really were happening. And it was practically, I mean, frankly, appalling that in so many ways Trump trusted Putin over our own intelligence services. Often Putin is playing a weak hand well, mainly because he was allowed to do it. And I think that we cannot allow that kind of thing to happen. Putin is a former KGB agent. He knows what he's doing, and he's undermining our democracies, and we cannot let that go on.
Mrs. Secretary, concretely, how President Biden will try to mend the awful relationship that Donald Trump had with the United States, the European Union, and NATO?
I think that there will be a genuine approach of listening and redeveloping a lot of the partnerships within an entirely different atmosphere. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think that you will see an America that wants to really operate within a functioning international system, but it will also, I think, require response from the other side. And I do hope, I always say this, you know this, and I was introduced this way. I was a born European. I just was raised in the United States, and I see myself as kind of the epitome of the US-European relationship. It hasn't always been easy, but I really do think that the Biden administration wants to have a different relationship of partnership, not only to deal with the issues of US-European issues, but also as partners dealing with other parts of the world. We started talking about China. I do think that there also, the US-European approach to how to deal with China will be very important.
Talking precisely about NATO, according to you, must Turkish President Erdogan, as a member of the organization, with the second most important army behind the one of the United States, must he be ousted for having one foot in Putin's backyard? Must he clarify his position?
I think that one has to be extremely careful with Turkey. Turkey is in a very important position geographically, and they have been good NATO partners. I think that there are a number of things that the Turks are doing that are very worrisome in terms of the way that they are looking at using Russian equipment and a variety of different things. Their behavior generally, frankly, and you're not going to like this, but I think that it was a big mistake earlier on, long before Erdogan, for Turkey to not be welcomed by the European Union. And I think that they need to, Erdogan has to stop doing the kinds of things that he's doing. But I think we need to remember that Turkey is in a geographically sensitive spot and important to us. And there needs to be a way to deal with what we see as unacceptable behavior. But I think we have to be very, very careful, because they are agitating in a number of places where we need to have some influence over their behavior. And so this is a delicate and difficult problem for this administration and for the NATO partners.
Mrs. Secretary, getting back to China, how do you think President Biden should deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping, especially since he signed an economic and military pact with Russia and Iran on 25 years, a kind of challenge to the West?
I think the United States is very worried about the kinds of things that Chinese military is doing in the South and East China Sea, also in the Straits of Taiwan. And that is where they are an adversary. And we have to make very clear that they are undermining international rules of navigation. The other is that they are competitors in a lot of technology and stealing intellectual property. And that has to be made clear. And the agreements that were worked out in the first round that Trump did, I think they are being looked at in terms of their effectiveness. But clearly something has to be done about that. And then there is the third area, which I mentioned earlier, cooperation.
According to you, will Joe Biden try to fill the military vacuum left by Donald Trump in Middle East to the benefit of Russia and Iran?
I think that what they're doing is reviewing everything, but it's not necessarily through military buildups. But I think, and again, I am not a part of the Biden administration, but from what I read, they are doing major reviews of various parts of the world, all parts of the world, because there has been a lot of disagreement in the way that things have been carried out in the last 4 years. There are some areas that can be built on. And then I have been, as I teach, I talk about this a lot. We're living in a very new era with very different capabilities, both in terms of technology and military. And so I think it's totally appropriate that the Biden administration is really looking very carefully at what is the job of every president is to protect the people, the territory, and the way of life.
Mrs. Secretary, the Obama administration has been charged with being too naive when it signed the nuclear deal with Iran on July 2015. Would you say that for Joe Biden, willing to renegotiate with Iran is a wishful thinking when we know through the IAEA, Iran has not respected the deal since May 2019 and violates it more and more?
I think it is wrong to call the Obama JCPOA naive. I think people don't understand that when you have difficult negotiations like that, you start with something and you develop. The major threat was the development of nuclear weapons. And so I think that it was a big mistake, major mistake of the Trump administration to walk away from a multilateral deal that in fact had the capabilities of limiting the time and provided very good inspection modes. I think that there is discussion about building upon what the JCPOA has been, trying to figure out how not only to limit the Iranian capabilities in terms of nuclear weapons, but also to expand to deal with some of the other issues that are out there that we don't like about Iranian behavior in terms of supporting terrorist groups and operating in other areas. And so it is something that is difficult to get any, I mean, a lot of negotiations depend on some level of trust, and by departing the way the Trump administration did has made it difficult with our friends and allies.
But don't you think that one way or the other, Iran will get the nuclear bomb as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did, making of it the life insurance of his regime?
Well, I think that this is why it was such a huge mistake for Trump to walk away, because what that agreement did was really get them to stop enriching their uranium, not expanding in terms of the things that they were doing, having them under some kind of visible way of checking on what they were doing. Trump really made a huge mistake. And I do think that it would be obviously very bad if they got a nuclear bomb. And that's why what needs to happen is to do whatever we can not to at least extend the window with the idea, frankly, there is some movement in Iran in terms of a lot of the Iranian people are not happy with the government that they have. So having that window and extending it is a very important part.
Do you fear that a conflict involving the US, Israel, NATO may break out with Iran?
I think one has to always be aware of things, but I think that it is very important to make it evident that that would be a mistake on everybody's part. So I think that this is where the tools of diplomacy are important, where we need our friends, so that it isn't just the United States. And I think that it's very important to move forward on the Middle East peace process, and also to try to figure out, I think the part that people don't fully understand how long the history of Arabs versus Persians, i.e., Saudi Arabia versus Iran, and the struggles that have been going on there. This has been going on a long time. We can't just turn away. We can't decide that we're not going to be a part of finding a solution with our friends and allies. It is a very difficult area. And when one lists the problems that are out there, they clearly are China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, in addition to a few others. But those are the ones that are the most difficult at the moment.
You are a great expert of foreign affairs, one of the greatest. The Israeli government says its relationship with the United States under Donald Trump has never been so good. Obviously, the mood is different with President Biden, who wants to negotiate, as we said it, with Iran and advocates the two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians, which Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to hear about. Is not there a risk of potential crisis between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I think that relations are definitely more difficult as a result of some of the past policies. I do think that Joe Biden, again, and people around him are very expert in terms of the kind of relationships, and they will try to figure out what to do. But I do think that one needs to understand that some of the problems lie with the way that Prime Minister Netanyahu has seen issues and has pushed. And I think, again, this is a very hard time, frankly, to have an interview about anything, because there are all these issues that are under review. And so what has happened is that I am sure that they are looking what to do in order to improve the relationship, but also to understand the importance of the Palestinians and the two-state solution. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Mrs. Secretary, thank you so much for having talked to our TV viewers on I-24 News, to our show, Malard at Large. It was a pleasure to have you and listen to your explanations about this more and more complicated world. To our TV viewers, see you soon again with prominent guests as the one we had tonight, Secretary Madeleine Albright.